Donald's company, once one of the most powerful in Nigeria, was now collapsing. Deals were being lost, investors were leaving, and customers no longer trusted the brand. The employees, who had once been proud to work for him, were now uncertain about their future. Despite all these warning signs, Donald refused to accept the truth. "Everything is fine," he kept saying. "I am Donald, the billionaire. My company can never fail." But deep inside, Press and his sons knew that things were not fine at all. One day, Donald was invited to speak at an important international business conference in Lagos. Many top business people and government officials were going to be there, and it was an opportunity to rebuild his company's reputation. However, on the morning of the event, Donald fell ill. He was too weak to travel. "Jane will represent me," he announced. "She is the general manager, and she is capable." Michael and his brother stared at him in disbelief. "Daddy, Jane knows nothing about business," Michael argued. Donald waved his hand. "Stop it. My daughter will handle it." Press shook her head. "This is a mistake, Donald." But Jane was excited. "Finally, people will see how important I am," she bragged out at the conference. Jane arrived late, dressed in expensive designer clothes, with bodyguards and personal assistants following her. Instead of preparing for the speech, she was busy taking pictures and posting them on social media. When it was time for her to speak, she walked confidently to the podium, holding the speech paper her father's secretary had prepared for her. The hall was filled with important businessmen and top politicians waiting to hear from Donald's company. Jane cleared her throat and looked at the paper. But there was a big problem: she didn't understand anything written on it. The business terms confused her. She couldn't even pronounce some of the words properly. The audience whispered among themselves. "Is this really the general manager of Donald's company?" one man asked. Another businessman shook his head. "This is an embarrassment." Jane tried to continue, but she stammered, misread words, and at one point, she even started laughing foolishly, thinking it was funny. People in the audience were disappointed. Some of them got up and walked out. The event was recorded live, and by the time Jane left the stage, social media was already buzzing with insults. "Donald's daughter is a disgrace," someone tweeted. "She doesn't even know anything about business," another person wrote. When Jane got home, she was still smiling, thinking she had done well. But as soon as she walked in, Pressy grabbed her phone and showed her the internet. "Read for yourself, Jane. The whole country is laughing at you." Jane scrolled through the comments, and for the first time, she felt embarrassed. Just then, Donald's phone rang. It was one of his biggest business partners. "Mr. Donald, after what happened today, we have decided to end our partnership with your company. We cannot trust someone like Jane to run your business." Donald's heart sank. More calls followed, investors pulling out, clients canceling contracts. Michael and his brothers stood with folded arms. "We warned you, Daddy." Donald sat down, holding his head. For the first time, he began to realize his mistake. Donald's business was falling apart faster than he could control. His once thriving empire was now drowning in debts, lawsuits, and unpaid salaries. Every day, he received bad news. One morning, as he sat in his study, his phone rang again. "Sir, the bank has frozen your company's account due to unpaid loans," his accountant reported. Donald's hands trembled. His heart pounded. "What do you mean? I am Donald, the billionaire." The accountant sighed. "Sir, the truth is, you are no longer a billionaire. If you don't act fast, you will lose everything." Donald slammed his phone on the table, breathing heavily. How did things go so wrong? Later that day, Pressy went to church for a special service, and the maids were unavailable because their main cook was sick. Donald, who hadn't eaten all day, walked into the living room, clutching his stomach. "Jane! Jane!" he called out. Jane, sitting on the couch, was busy recording a TikTok video. She rolled her eyes and removed her AirPods. "What is it, Daddy?" "I am very hungry," Donald complained. "Tell the maid to make food." Jane flipped her hair. "She's sick, Daddy." "She's not around." Donald groaned. "Then go and cook something for me." Jane's eyes widened. "Cook? Me? Daddy, I don't know how to cook." Donald frowned. "Nonsense. You are a woman, and you must know how to cook." Jane pouted. "But Daddy, I don't." "Jane, go to the kitchen and prepare me something to eat now," Donald ordered. Jane sighed dramatically and stood up. "Fine. But if you get food poisoning, don't blame me," she muttered as she walked to the kitchen. Inside the kitchen, Jane stood in front of the stove, completely lost. She had never cooked in her life. She tapped her phone and searched "how to make simple food for Dad" on YouTube. A video popped up, showing how to make rice and stew. "Easy," Jane said, nodding to herself. She followed the steps, cutting vegetables and frying tomatoes. Then, she needed to add seasoning. She opened the kitchen cabinet, where different ingredients were stored. Jane grabbed a small container with white powder and assumed it was salt. She sprinkled a generous amount into the food. But what Jane didn't know was that it wasn't salt. It was rat poison, which the maid had kept in the kitchen to deal with rodents. Minutes later, Jane carried the plate of food to her father. "Here you go, Daddy. Enjoy." Donald, still angry from his business troubles, took a big spoonful without hesitation. He mumbled. "Not bad, Jane. You see, you can cook." Jane smirked. "Of course, Daddy. I told you I can do anything." But a few moments later, Donald's face changed. He started coughing. Then his hands began to shake. "Daddy, are you okay?" Jane asked, confused. Suddenly, Donald grabbed his throat. His eyes bulged. His whole body started shaking violently. "Jane, what did you put in the food?" Donald gasped. Jane's heart pounded. "Just salt. And seasoning. And, her voice trailed off as she suddenly remembered the white powder she had used. Then she gasped. "Oh my God, was that salt, or? Donald fell from his chair, clutching his stomach in pain. He was poisoned. "Daddy!" Jane screamed, shaking him. "Somebody help." The house was in chaos. Jane's screams filled the air as she watched her father lying on the floor, struggling to breathe. "Help! Somebody help!" she cried, shaking his body. The security guards rushed in, and when they saw Donald foaming at the mouth, they quickly carried him into the car and sped off to the hospital. Jane, trembling in fear, sat beside her father, crying. "Daddy, please don't die. I didn't mean to. I thought it was salt." Donald could barely keep his eyes open. His body was weak, and his breathing was heavy. Was this how it would end? When they arrived, doctors and nurses rushed to save Donald's life. After hours of treatment, they finally stabilized him. However, he remained weak and had to be placed under strict medical supervision. Press arrived at the hospital, her face full of worry. When she saw Jane sitting outside the emergency room, she rushed to her. "What happened?" Press demanded. Jane burst into tears. "Mommy, I didn't mean to. I was only trying to cook for Daddy." Press sighed deeply and shook her head. "This is what I was afraid of. You don't know how to do anything useful, Jane." Jane sobbed harder, but Press ignored her and walked into the hospital room. Donald lay on the bed, weak but conscious. He slowly turned to look at his wife. "Donald," Press said, folding her arms. "How do you feel?" Donald sighed. "Weak. But I will be fine." Press nodded, then said, "This is just the beginning." Before Donald could respond, his phone vibrated on the bedside table. It was his accountant calling. Too weak to hold the phone, he put it on speaker. "Hello." The accountant's voice was shaky. "Sir, I don't know how to say this, but we have a very big problem." Donald frowned. "What problem?" The accountant hesitated before speaking. "Jane borrowed millions from the bank using your company's documents." Donald's heart almost stopped. He struggled to sit up. "What did you say?" "She took huge loans from different banks, sir. The banks are now demanding repayment. Since your company is already collapsing, they have no choice but to take legal action." Donald's head spun. No, my Jane cannot do this." The accountant sighed. "Sir, the documents have her signature. We have proof. She has been living a fake rich life, throwing money at clubs and buying expensive things, all with borrowed money in your company's name." Tears gathered in Donald's eyes. His hands shook. His own daughter, the one he trusted the most, had ruined him. Press, standing beside him, simply closed her eyes and exhaled. "Donald, are you still surprised?" she asked. "You created this monster." Donald turned to look at her, but he had no words, hoping to see his sons for comfort. Donald asked Press, "Where are the boys? Are they coming?" Press shook her head. "They refused to come." Donald's heart broke. "What? Why?" She looked him straight in the eye. "They said you are reaping what you sowed." Donald felt like a knife had been driven into his heart. His own sons had abandoned him in his time of need. His business was gone. His reputation was in ruins. And now, his family was falling apart. As Donald lay back on the hospital bed, staring at the ceiling, only one thought filled his mind: have I truly lost everything? Donald sat by the hospital window, staring blankly at the sky. His body was recovering, but his soul felt broken beyond repair. The man who was once one of the wealthiest businessmen in Nigeria was now nothing more than a middle-class man struggling to survive. The bank had seized most of his properties. His company had been shut down. His investments were gone. Everything he worked for had crumbled like sand slipping through his fingers. He could still hear his accountant's final words ringing in his head. "Sir, it's over. The banks have taken everything." Donald covered his face with his hands, tears slipping through his fingers. He had lost everything, but the worst part was knowing that it was his own fault. He thought about his late father's warning in the dream. "Stop overpampering Jane or you will regret it." He had ignored it. He thought about Press, his faithful wife, who had won him over and over again. "Donald, you are creating a monster." He had ignored her. He thought about his sons, the boys who had once looked up to him with respect but now refused to even visit him in the hospital. "You are reaping what you sowed." Those words haunted him. Weeks later, Donald was discharged from the hospital, but he did not return to his luxurious mansion. That house now belonged to the bank. Instead, he moved into a smaller house in a middle-class neighborhood. His cars were gone, except for one old Toyota Corolla. Jane. She was nowhere to be found. After destroying his business, she had run away, embarrassed by the shame and failure she had caused. Donald sat alone in his small house, holding his head. A billionaire reduced to nothing. No more bodyguards. No more private jets. No more expensive suits, just regret. One night, Donald sat in his dark room, staring at the wall. "What is left for me?" he thought bitterly. His eyes filled with tears as he whispered, maybe it would have been better if I had died that day. But then, he heard a soft voice behind him. Donald. He turned and saw Press standing in the doorway. Her eyes were filled with both sadness and love. Donald, you are alive for a reason, she said softly. You may have lost your wealth, but you still have a chance to make things right. Donald wiped his tears. How? I lost everything. I failed as a businessman. I failed as a father. I failed as a husband. Press walked over and held his hand. Then start again. Learn from your mistakes. Become a better man. For the first time in months, Donald allowed himself to hope. Maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late. Donald's downfall changed him completely. He was no longer the arrogant billionaire who believed money could solve everything. Now, he was a humbled man, a man who had learned his lessons the hard way. Sitting in his small living room, he looked around at his family. The family he had once neglected in his blindness. With tears in his eyes, he turned to his wife. Press, he said, his voice filled with deep regret. I have failed you. Press looked at him calmly. She had waited years to hear these words. Donald, I warned you. I told you what would happen. Donald nodded. I know. And I was foolish not to listen. Can you ever forgive me? Press sighed, then reached for his hands. You are my husband, and I will always stand by you. But you must correct your mistakes. He turned to his sons, who sat silently, watching him. My boys, he said with shame in his voice. I know I made you feel like you were not important. I was wrong. Can you forgive me? His first son, David, sighed. Dad, we have always respected you. But you made us feel like we didn't matter. I hope you have truly changed. Donald nodded. I have. And I promise to prove it. The biggest challenge was Jane. The girl who had grown up thinking the world revolved around her. The girl who had ruined her father's empire. Donald knew he had to correct his mistake. This time, he would be firm. He walked into Jane's room, where she was busy on her phone as usual. Give me that phone, he ordered. Jane looked up, shocked. What? I said give me your phone. Donald repeated, his voice filled with authority. Jane rolled her eyes. Daddy, please, I need my phone. Donald snatched the phone from her hands and smashed it on the floor. Jane gasped. From today, no more mobile phones, no more freedom to go out, and no more treating you like a queen. You will start doing house chores, and the maids will rest. Donald declared. Jane's mouth dropped open. Daddy, you can't do this to me. I just did, Donald said firmly. Welcome to your new life. From that day on, Jane was forced to cook, clean, sweep, and mop while the maids did nothing. Whenever she complained, Donald would simply say, "This is what I should have done a long time ago." Press, watching everything, would always shake her head and remind Donald, "Didn't I tell you?" And Donald, humbled, would reply, "Yes, my wife, you told me." Donald's first son, David, had been smart with his money. While working under his father, he had saved up enough to start his own business. One morning, he came to his father and said, "Dad, I am opening a new company. It's small, but it's a start." Donald looked at his son with pride. "You have done what I could not. You have built something on your own." David smiled. "I learned from your mistakes, Dad." Donald laughed for the first time in a long while. "That is good. I am proud of you, my son." After months of discipline, Jane had changed. The proud, rude girl had become quieter, more obedient. One morning, Donald walked up to her and handed her a small bag. "You are going back to school," he said. Jane's face lit up. "Really?" Yes, Donald said. But not to the expensive schools you love. This time, you will attend a local school. No luxury, no private drivers. You will learn to value life. Jane's smile faded. Daddy, please. Donald shook his head. No begging. You must learn. And so, Jane was sent to a humble school, where she was forced to live like a normal person. For the first time in her life, she had to face reality. Donald's family finally found happiness. There was peace, love, and respect. But one thing never changed: Donald never became a billionaire again. He remained an average businessman. He had enough to take care of his family, but the days of wealth and luxury were gone forever. One evening, as he sat with Press on the balcony, he sighed and said, "I have learned my lesson, my wife." Press smiled. "And what lesson is that?" Donald looked up at the sky and said, "A tree that grows too fast without strong roots will fall when the storm comes." Press nodded. "And you have fallen." "Yes," Donald said. "But I have also learned to stand again." And with that, Donald accepted his new life, not as a billionaire, but as a wiser man.